Hello, everyone. Oh my God, thank you guys so much for coming. I was really concerned there would be nobody here, and I'm really happy there's so many of you. This is so exciting. So yes, I am the Viet Vegan. I should have realized that there was going to be an introduction because my next slide is about me, but that's okay. Today we're talking about veganism and intersectionality, and I'm really excited. Okay, so who am I? As I already was introduced, I am the Viet Vegan. I'm Vietnamese. I'm a second-generation immigrant. So my parents came in '85 and '89, and then they had me. I feel like it's so loud. Please use she, her pronouns for me, and I identify as queer. But I'm always aiming to advocate for animals with an intersectional lens, with an intersectional approach, creating vegan content that is sustainable, that is LGBTQ inclusive, that is self-critical, and most importantly, feminist. So what is intersectionality? So this is not a term that was originally used for veganism. It was a theory first coined in 1989 by Kimberly Crenshaw, who is an American civil rights advocate and professor at UCLA and Columbia, their schools of law for gender and race issues. So Kimberly Crenshaw says, intersectionality is a lens through which you can see where power comes and collides, where it interlocks and intersects. It's not simply that there's a race problem here, a gender problem there, a class or LGBTQ problem there. Many times that framework erases what happens to people who are subject to all of those things. I see someone taking a picture of it, so I'm just gonna let them do that. All right, I'm moving on. So the term intersectionality has become a key analytic framework through which feminist scholars in various fields talk about the structural identities of race, class, gender, and sexuality. This is by Brittany Cooper in the Oxford Handbook of Feminist Theory. So in essence, intersectionality is a concept that different systems of oppression interconnect, or intersect. That makes more sense. So I had before a graphic of like all these different like systems of oppression, and I had like lines everywhere. It looked like a hot mess. And then I was like, maybe there's a graphic that already exists. And lo and behold, it exists. It's a little hard to read, but I'll read out the different systems there. So the top half is all of the different systems of oppression, and then the bottom half are kind of like the groups of the people that often are affected by those systems of oppression. So those systems are genderism, sexism, racism, Eurocentrism, heterosexism, ableism, educationism, ageism, politics of appearance, classism, language bias, colorism, anti-Semitism, and pronatalism. And so as you can see at the bottom, like these are all the sort of the groups that are affected by those systems. Now, I literally found this by Googling intersections of oppression graphic. So you can also find that too. So what do all of these systems have in common? They are groups that are exploited for their bodies, exploited for what color they are, like what class they are. These are all different forms of exploitation. Another thing that is connected to, if you're not affected by those systems of oppression, you benefit from the privilege of not suffering for those systems. So can you choose what you can eat? Do you have access to a car or a grocery store? Do you have time to learn how to cook a balanced diet? Do you have access to the internet? Are you able-bodied? And this is something that connects to me as a person of color. Like, do you have to sacrifice aspects of your culture to be vegan? If you don't, that's a privilege. So I find that sometimes a lot of people struggle with the concept of privilege. I have people saying to me, well, I was poor and I was white. How can you say that I was privileged? And I think that a really good analogy that sort of helps people understand, this is from Dolly Chu from The Person You Mean to Be. She describes it using the economic term headwinds and tailwinds. Does anyone know what that term means? No? Okay, that's okay. So headwinds and tailwinds is typically used for like aircrafts. So when you're flying as a plane into a headwind, that's wind going against you, and as a tailwind, that's wind going with you. So like say you're flying from like LA to Toronto, there's going towards LA, you're flying with the tailwind, and if going to Toronto, you're flying into headwind. So that's why it takes a little longer to drive to Toronto, or not drive, fly. So I think the metaphor that really helps me understand headwinds and tailwinds is like if you're running. If you are a runner, running into the wind, so running this way, and the wind's, you're working kind of a little harder. There's a little more effort that you have to put into it. But if you're running with a tailwind, it's a little bit easier. You're just kind of like going along, and you're like, oh, this is okay. This is a nice run. So this sort of explains that you can have certain privileges, so certain tailwinds, but also have certain headwinds. So, for example, for me, I am a person of color. I'm a woman. And I'm queer, so I have a lot of these sort of systems working against me. But I'm able-bodied for the most part. I came from a middle-class family. I had access to education. These are tailwinds that help me. So the ideal situation is that you have certain tailwinds that will help you fight for other people's headwinds, because if we don't help other people, why are we even here? That's what veganism is all about, right? It's having compassion and helping others. And it's about having compassion for all. So take a stand against people who use oppressive language to advocate for animals. So there are so many different aspects of intersectionalism, and today I'm really focusing on language and the way that we advocate for animals, and how different ways that we advocate for animals can be problematic. So I just have like a trigger warning here. In the next slide, I'm going to show some images. I'm not a big fan of showing graphic imagery, but I'm just using examples of like what other people use to convince people to go vegan, just to give you a frame of reference. So we're going to talk about Holocaust comparisons, sexual assault comparisons, slavery comparisons, and xenophobic sort of slang or campaigns or whatever. So the first up, Holocaust comparisons. Okay, so this is something that people use all the time. People compare what happens to animals and factory farming to what happened to the Holocaust. And I think that it's really hard for people who are Jewish to identify with the vegan movement if this is something that's thrown in their face all the time. There are people who have survived the Holocaust and have advocated for animals, saying that this is how they identified with the animals. But I think that it harms a lot more people and it offends a lot more people when this is something that is used to promote veganism, because this was not that long ago, right? And there are people who are still affected by this today. Why would we offend the very people that we want to come to veganism? Why would we use language that makes them feel othered? Because this was, again, not so long ago. In here it says, to animals, all people are Nazis. And I think that term has so much like gravitas to it, and I think it's really negative. And there are real people out there who are actual Nazis. It still is real. So I think that we should retire the term Nazis for anything like grammar Nazi or police or vegan Nazi or vegan police. Just stop using that word, because there are real Nazis out there, and they are full of hate and full of vile. And I really don't think we need to attribute that to veganism. One more thing about that. So again, if there are people who are Jewish and who are talking about it, that is their sort of their frame of reference, their lived experience. I think that's not on me to tell them how that they should advocate for veganism. However, if we are not Jewish, if we are not people who have that lived experience, I really don't think that's our lane to talk about that. Another example is sexual assault comparisons. So a lot of people, I hear this all the time, dairy is rape. That's what they say. And as someone who's a survivor myself, that's really hard to hear. I'm already vegan, right? I already believe that dairy is cruel and unjust. And I think that there are different parallels in terms of sexual assault and in the dairy industry that can be used, but I feel like using the term rape can be really harmful. So 1 in 4 North American women will be sexually assaulted during their lifetime. 1 in 4. That is a huge number of people. I think I forgot to write down the statistic, but between 2 and 4% of those cases are never, or only 2 to 4 cases are reported. So you never know who might be living with this sort of history. So why would you trigger people with that history when you just want them to go vegan? There are different ways that you can talk about what happens in the dairy industry without using that word. So I think that it is totally a feminist issue that the reproductive rights of chickens and cows are infringed upon, and that's definitely a feminist issue and something that we should care about. But I think that there are ways to describe it that don't necessarily trigger other people, because again, why would you want to offend the people that you're trying to get to go vegan? So next up, this is something that I experience as a person of color a lot. So I grew up Vietnamese, and in Vietnamese culture, we eat a lot of food that people in the West consider weird or gross or nasty, or why would you eat that? In the middle, I have this is a screenshot. I cropped out the person's name and stuff like that, but this is from Facebook. Someone posted on a Facebook group that I'm in, just looking at what vegan options are available on a food delivery app, and this place sells spicy pork intestine. I can't even feel good about ordering anything from this place because of how disgusting that is. I had no idea that was a thing. Slew of disgusted emojis, and they had circled the spicy pork intestine noodle. So I just think that, like, obviously, I don't agree that we should be eating any part of an animal anymore, but I think it's in our best interest to be respectful of other cultures. If we want everyone to go vegan, not everyone is Western, right? A lot of people have different foods, different cultures. Why would you offend them? Why would you, make fun of their culture when you're trying to get them to come to veganism? And isn't it amazing when you try foods from other cultures as a vegan, trying so many different cuisines? I am way more open to different cuisines now as a vegan than I was as an omnivore. And being closed-minded about what other people eat, I just think that's not really helpful to our cause. Another example here is the Yulin Meat Festival and how people could, I see a lot of people throw a lot of racist slurs about how could Chinese people eat this? How could Vietnamese people eat this? You're monsters, insert whatever Asian slur that I've heard before. I just think that we don't call the people who eat beef and pork that sort of same slur. I really don't think that we should be doing that to Chinese people or to other Asian cultures that eat that kind of thing. Just be respectful, be nice. Basically, my entire talk here is about be nice. The next thing here is slavery comparisons. Now, I hear this a lot, and it's really rough to see because, yes, what is happening in factory farms is awful. Yes, they're being bred solely for our use and our purposes, and I think that is atrocious. But I really think that, again, slavery was not that long ago. The civil rights movement is still going on today. A lot of people who are people of color, their rights are being taken away at this very moment. And there's a lot of history and current use of comparing people of color to various animals. And that's just really problematic. Just look at the history books. And I understand that a lot of people who are comparing animals to slavery, they're trying to uplift animals to meet the same level as people, right? But unfortunately, what's happening is that animals are being lifted up to people of color. And unfortunately, we live in an era where people of color are not at equal as non-people of color. So how can we uplift animals when we are not all equal? So I think it's important that, again, why offend people that were trying to come to veganism? There are a lot of people of color out there, and we want them to go vegan. So, again, be nice. All right. So this is something that I have talked a lot about when it comes to feminism and veganism and how they connect and how we can, dismantle a lot of toxic masculinity in order to bring up animal lives. So this here is a magazine cover that is you've seen this kind of stuff before, right? Meat is masculinity, you gotta have all that protein, gotta eat paleo for the gains or whatever, that kind of stuff. I don't understand what obsession that people have with meat. It's just, I don't get it. But in a national survey in Canada, 7.1% of Canadians were vegetarian, while 2.3% were vegan. However, from that same data set, women were 1.6 times more likely to choose plant-based options than men. 1.6 times? That's ridiculous. So again, first off, I apologize. This sort of data set is very binary. It's not inclusive of people who are genderqueer. That's just the data set that I was using, but you're included in my mind. So according to a survey in September 2013, 79% of US vegans are women. 79%, 4 out of 5 vegans are women. Why can't it be 50-50%? Why is that? So I think that, going back to dismantling this idea of masculinity, dismantling the idea that, it's not masculine to care or it's too feminine to care or be compassionate or to have a nurturing sort of personality, those things are not deemed masculine. And I think that sort of dismantling that concept is something that will only help people as a whole to care more about each other, but also to care about animals. So in essence, why should we care about intersectionality? As I was creating this sort of topic and like trying to like, put together the argument, all I could think of, the only answer that first came to mind was like, why not? Why not care? It's just as easy to care. We as vegans, our like main thing is that we care. We care about animals. We care about their welfare. We care about people's health. We care about the environment. Why not care about people in general? So I'm of the idea that a rising tide lifts all ships. This is another, I don't think I said that right. A rising tide lifts all ships. This is another economic term. Again, I'm not using it for economic purposes. I don't really know the economic metaphor for it, but the idea is that when we lift up people of color, when we lift up queer folks, when we lift up women, we're also lifting up animals. So a rising tide lifts all ships. The more we care about other things, the more people will be like, oh, okay, vegans aren't totally problematic and mean and awful. Maybe I should care about what they're caring about because, from my experience, having people berate you and yell at you and tell you all the things that you're doing wrong isn't helpful. So sorry, that was really loud. Cast a wider net. Isn't the goal to get everyone to go vegan, stop using language that is problematic, and get people to go vegan through nicer means, I mean, I personally, my sort of way to do it is with food. Be like, oh, who can say no to a vegan cupcake? Ooh, sugar, delicious. But veganism is about compassion, so why not simply have compassion for everybody? I feel like I blew really quickly through this presentation, so this is my last slide. But the key takeaways are, what now? What can you do? I threw a bunch of information at you about all the things that you shouldn't say, shouldn't do, shouldn't be, shouldn't whatever. But what can you do now to give back, to be more intersectional? So I highly recommend that you support people of color, ask for better representation, support Black-owned businesses, support women-owned businesses, advocate for safe spaces for LGBTQ groups. This is something that I really applaud the Vegan Festival of Montreal for including people who are people of color, who are intersectional, and giving those people a voice. Because a lot of times in the different Veg Fests that I've been a part of, all of the speakers are white, they're male, rarely any of them are people of color, rarely any of them are trans or queer or any of that kind of thing. So I think it's important that we ask for better representation because, there are a lot of people in the LGBTQ space. There are a lot of people of color. We want them to feel welcome. We want them to feel represented in the movement. Why would we not make a space that is more welcome, that makes them feel, hey, I could be like you. I could be vegan. I can be intersectional. I see myself in you, therefore I see myself in this movement. That's it. Thank you so much.